Hello there, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Courtney Stewart is unavailable today. We are still doing our regularly scheduled news updates. Fortunately, there hasn't been any significant breaking news today. It's been sort of what is the new normal and the new routine around here. We will be doing a news wrap-up later today. What I can say is Tom Brady has said that he will not be renewing his contract with the Patriots. He will be moving on to another franchise, which I believe is as yet unannounced. Ohio has called off its presidential primary. This is ostensibly, in my understanding, in violation of a judge's order. Technically, the judge said that they couldn't move the date. So Ohio appears to have simply called it off. Florida and Arizona and Illinois are still holding theirs today, so we will ostensibly have the results of that. Biden won, I believe, yesterday's primary. I believe, let's see, we got a couple of things here. We have, Trump has now officially endorsed the plan endorsed by Senator Romney and two former vice presidential aides. We discussed that plan yesterday. That was to give $1,000 to every American citizen in order to assist with the expenses of shelter in place and lockdown orders. The exact amount hasn't been settled upon, and whether or not he can actually push this through Congress is a whole nother thing, but we now do have a member of Congress, a powerful one, Mitt Romney, and the President of the United States ostensibly behind the plan. They would do this as quickly as possible, according to the President of the United States. This would ostensibly draw from the $40 billion that has been released by the declaration of a state of emergency, a national state of emergency. We are, according to the CDC, at a tipping point. If we are unable to, by the social distancing plans, if we are unable to stem the tide of new infections in the United States, we will most likely head to where Italy is now, which would include a lockdown of the entire country and an overwhelming of the medical system. So this is one of the reasons why, and we've discussed this before and we will say it again, the social distancing isn't to protect yourself, it's to protect everybody else. People who are perfectly healthy who get this virus usually are completely fine. What happens is they infect others. So that's why this is being taken so seriously. We will have a couple of graphs as to how this has progressed. Remember, the disease progresses in a exponential fashion, not linear. One person can infect 10, each of those 10 can infect another 10, so on and so forth. That's why all of these are so important. We do have Miami now joining the list of cities that are shutting down all its restaurants and pubs and other social gathering areas. Nunes has come out. We gave Nunes a bit of a hard time because he said people should go out to pubs and restaurants, and he said that families should go out and do that, and he has clarified that he meant drive-through pubs. I'm not kidding. I'm not that funny. He said people should go to drive-through pubs. Thank you, Mr. Nunes. He is living up to my expectations of Congress thus far. 37 states in the U.S. have closed their public schools. That is well over half. That's actually about 2/3 now. And hopefully there's going to be no other major breaking news. We did have a loss of, a significant loss of 12% now of the stock market. We will be keeping an eye on it. It's been going up and down. It's going to be unstable, so on and so forth. So like I said, tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, we will be doing our usual rundown of what's been going on for the day, but fortunately, nothing huge today. Very strange day. We do have a special guest today. We are going to be continuing our deconversion story. So with us today is going to be Suris the Skeptic. We're going to be talking with him how he went from a believer to a skeptic and now ostensibly anti-theist, who we've had on before, in fact, and we thoroughly enjoyed having him on last time. Well, yeah, I mean, we had him on last time. It was decent. It was an okay show. I'll be honest with you, it was an okay show, but our three other guests got coronavirus and had to cancel. So a little bottom of the barrel digging here, but we were able to get him on. So, Suris, how are you, my friend? Maybe we're not friends after that intro, but
Wait, we were friends before that intro? This is news to me.
yeah, well, we were pretending at least. Now we may not be able to. Now we may have the.
It's one thing to pretend in front of the cameras, but it's another thing to pretend behind the cameras. I mean, what kind of elaborate like system are you trying to run there? Anyway, hi, how's it going, Nick?
It's going good, thanks. How are you? Yeah, people can only see what happened in the pre-show. I'm not even going to dignify what you said in the pre-show by repeating it out here.
In the pre-show, I said that I couldn't find toilet paper, and I downed 10 chicken wings. Does that?
Yep.
That seems accurate.
Yes, that's accurate. We will leave the description there. So,
is this like a what happened in Budapest type of thing?
Exactly. I was going to say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but nothing's happening in Vegas right now. They shut that down too. So, welcome back. I have a way to start. I'm just out of curiosity. We discussed this earlier, but just for people watching, how are you holding up with what's going on?
So we recently got most of our supplies except for toilet paper and paper towels stocked up because unfortunately, those are the two things that nowhere has. We've been to multiple places, large grocers, convenience stores, places like Dollar Tree and Dollar General, and no real luck. Although Target did have milk. That was something that I was surprised by. So we were actually able to, that was one of the other things we weren't able to get before, but Target luckily had milk, and Kroger actually has meat, because apparently people are buying all the pasta, but not remembering that they have freezers and can freeze meats for several months on end, and they're going to need the nutrients from that, because pasta is a complex carbohydrate that only lasts a couple hours in your system, whereas proteins generally help keep you going for a little longer. So we were able to get a lot of that done. It also helped that during my stream yesterday, we had a very generous donation come in that a good portion of that has gone to getting supplies. Originally, it was meant for bills, but now getting supplies is a little more important because we've got at least 2 people in the house who are immunocompromised, and we are somewhat skeptical as to whether or not I am, because a lot of the things that I've been telling Erin, which if you've ever talked with her, she has worked in the biomed industry before. A lot of things that I describe about what happened to me, for instance, like if I'm moving furniture, I start to get allergy symptoms from moving furniture. If I'm too stressed, I start to get those symptoms. You said that's apparently an issue with mast cell production, which is a type of autoimmune deficiency. So we might actually have 3 people in the house who are immunocompromised. So all of us would be in that lovely 20% lethality rate area, which is less than ideal. But, at least it's not the coronavirus that kills you. It's the drowning in the upper respiratory infection that kills you. So
how, I was going to say optimistic, but I don't think that. I'd rather think of it as that's what climbers say. It's not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden stop. Okay, admittedly, but
yeah,
I'm not sure that necessarily helps. Yeah, it's the sudden stop. Yeah, well, okay, so now are you thinking of this? I'm going to ask the theist question. Are you thinking of going back to God now?
No. Unfortunately, for me to go back to theism would require me to believe in a God, and I have no control over that. If someone can demonstrate to me a method by which we can fundamentally change our beliefs, which is not fake it till you make it, aka Pascal's wager, as Pascal's wager was originally intended, then I would love to see it, because this would explain why so many flat earthers have convinced themselves that Australia doesn't exist. But I don't currently live in the reality where that's a thing that we can do with our brains. So here we are.
All right. So, which is to say, okay, so I put a gun to your head and say, believe that the sun is purple, or I'm going to kill you. You've got a problem.
I can lie to you. That's about it.
That's about okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's as far as I can get there. Believe the sun is purple. I can try really hard, and I can tell you that I am. And by the time that the dribbly bits are falling off of the wall and the gunshot has at least been heard by 3 people, we'll have figured out that this experiment was a failure.
Well, or if they're Christian, they just pretend to believe you, because there's that little hinge of doubt in a lot of them too. I think that's what I found. If I will say this, if theists were truly confident in their beliefs, I suspect far fewer of them would be interested in conversions. They don't find happiness in their beliefs. They find happiness in getting other people to believe the same thing. That's been
It depends.
my experience.
It depends on the theist, though, because like a solitary pagan is generally okay. A solitary Wiccan can generally be okay, but a solitary Abrahamic, that's usually where you have issue, because there's a mandate to convert, and thus a lot of contentment. Hold on, a lot of contentment seems to come from being able to successfully convert people, and a lot of resentment can come from not being able to convert people. And even like just converting people horizontally can get you that same kind of contentment. I know when I was a Christian, I had a friend who went to a different church than mine, and I went to his church a couple times. But then when he went to my church, I convinced him that, non-denominational is the way to go, even though as a kid I didn't quite understand that non-denominational just meant Baptist light. But I was like, no, non-denominational is the way to go. This is how Jesus intended things, and I got him to kind of believe my side of that, and there was a lot of happiness there, when in reality I hadn't actually done anything. I took somebody who believed in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and made him believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. I've done the equivalent of taking a video card and just swapping it out for an identical video card of a different brand. Like that's all I've done.
So is that the kind of let's talk about how you got into religion? It sounds like maybe through your parents, which is how I think most people do. Very few people. I mean, people come in through other ways, but so what religion were you raised as, and how did that affect you?
So, like I said, I was raised as a non-denominational Christian, which functionally just means Baptist. You're just a non-denom kind of ends up being like almost laissez-faire Baptist, where you look at the fire and brimstone Baptists and laugh, and then you go do the same thing but with sugar and honey. The way that I came to Christianity, though, as a kid, was my mom had me go through Pensacola Christian Academy, which, if you know anything about that school, they are actually from the old IFB, which, of course, Steven Anderson's new IFB, but he used to be part of the old IFB. They were created from funding from the old IFB and a Seventh-day Adventist sect. So take your hatred and bigotry and your post-apocalyptia, marry them together, and you get the money that created Pensacola Christian Academy, which means my upbringing was very violently Christian. But the Christianity that I was taught was like a whitewashed young earth creationist Christianity in school. And we weren't strictly taught young earth, but we were given tidbits that led us to that. So they wouldn't say the earth is 6,000 years old. They would say there are biblical scholars who have traced the lineage in the Bible to equate to about 6,400 years, meaning that we would take that and go, oh, there's evidence that the earth is 6,400 years, because we've been taught that the Bible is a form of very strong evidence. So even though I cannot recall being told strictly that the earth was 6K years old, I can recall exactly how I came to that conclusion based on what my teacher told me, which I would argue is a more insidious way of convincing a child of something. You didn't just tell them it's true. You gave them a false methodology, and they followed that methodology and came to the conclusion themselves. Now it's their idea. Now it's that much harder to get that idea baked out of them. But going to that school was kind of how I learned. I learned homophobia there, transphobia there. I learned how to be the most loving, aka bigoted Christian I could be. When I came out of that school, even after 3 years of public schooling, because I only went there for elementary school. I could have gone there my entire schooling career, but I wanted to leave because the school was very abusive. They wouldn't let you speak in the school. You couldn't speak in the hallways. You couldn't speak at PE. You couldn't speak at lunch. You could speak for the last 5 minutes of lunch, and sometimes at PE you were allowed to speak, but it was always at the teacher's discretion. Allowing you to speak was not the default. So... and they were very inconsistent with like what paraphernalia was banned at the school. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bionicle, the Lego franchise.
Yeah, it's like it's like Legos, yeah.
Well, they're owned by Legos, and they created comics based on the
okay.
characters that were written by DC Comics, actually. And as a kid, I was into those comics very heavily, to the point where Pensacola Christian Academy had a summer camp. They had 2 summer camps. One was a all summer, kind of like a daycare that they would take you to during the summer months where you couldn't go to school, so that you could always get your daily dose of indoctrination. And then they had a 2-week go to a cabin type summer camp. At that summer camp, they had a store where you could, like, every now and again, there'd be an hour or 2 of recreation time. And in the recreation room, there was a store. The store had Bionicle merchandise because, hey, kids are into Bionicle, buy that stuff at the store. The merchandise that I bought at that store, owned by Pensacola Christian Academy, when I went back to Pensacola Christian Academy, I was told that I was not allowed to use it because I got, like, pens and stuff with the Bionicle masks. I was told I was not allowed to use any of that at school because that's of the devil. But I bought it at your store. I bought it at your place.
Wow.
So I got to see what happens when when there's at least 3 chiefs and none of them are communicating with one another. Which helped a lot because that gave me a lot of experience for when I started working at Walmart dealing with the same thing. Where none of the managers talked to one another, but they all had something to tell you. But by the time that I got out of that, I had developed a mentality that was very toxic. So I had a very the man doesn't cook in the house mentality, which was really awkward because I grew to love cooking. So I was like, I'm not even supposed to be doing this, but I did it. Like, I grew to love cooking. I grew to like, not necessarily love, but I learned how to quilt. Like, a lot of things that are not considered like manly traits, but I learned them, that I was told that I was not supposed to do them. When I got to high school and I started dealing with things like friends coming to me and letting me know that, hey, they'd been sexually assaulted, like all kinds of newer, harder things to deal with, I dealt with them through the lens of my Christian upbringing. So it would my method of comforting would always be something like, that is horrible, but don't worry, it happened for a reason. God has a plan. Not even realizing that what I've effectively done is not just justified through God that my friend had been sexually assaulted, but I also just justified every sexual assault that ever happens as long as they come in contact with the person and uses the experience from their time being assaulted to help that person. I've now justified those because that was all part of God's plan. Those dots didn't connect for me as a kid, but those were the things that I did and said based on my Christian upbringing. So it's a wonderfully toxic ideology that I was taught from childhood up.
Well, now, and if you don't mind my asking, it's well, the other thing you've done, of course, too, is you've denied their experience of it, their pain. They're now no longer really allowed to have, or to they can't experience anything negative from it because, well, it's actually in some way a blessing. I mean, it's the same thing when it was the congressman who said that if a woman gets raped, it's actually a blessing for whatever reason, but use the same kind of reasoning. You intimated, so if you don't mind my asking, you intimated that you had been brought up with homophobia and transphobia. Were these things that had affected you and that you actually projected out?
So with homophobia, I was taught very much the homosexual people are confused. God created Adam and Eve, and these two were meant to become one in the flesh, and that was the only way that things were supposed to work. And that created a problem for me when I started encountering. I didn't encounter them in middle school, but I started in high school encountering people who were my friends and were homosexual, and I always felt repulsed by them, and I could never explain why. So I always defaulted to, well, I just don't want them trying to have sex with me, which, first of all, is probably one of the most arrogant things you can think, because you're essentially saying, I don't want this person to fanboy over me because I'm just that good. I don't have that happening even now that I've got a YouTube channel where people can, so I don't know why I had that kind of confidence as a kid. But where the transphobia thing came in, I was always taught that God never made any mistakes. So if you grew up crippled, that was because God wanted you to have the lived experience of growing up crippled so that you could help other people who grew up crippled, which again just justifies every other person growing up crippled, even though God is creative enough to make a world where nobody grows up fucking crippled. But, whatever. Because I had that mentality, the first encounter I had with someone who was trans was a friend of mine in high school. I don't want to say their name, but they said that they would prefer me, instead of referring to them as a female name, refer to them as the name that their parents would have given them if they had been born male, because that's where they felt their gender identity was. And I adamantly refused, and I had arguments with them all the time. This person was a Catholic, so I argued with them from the Christian perspective. God didn't make mistakes in making you. Not even realizing that being trans doesn't mean God made a mistake. He just fucking made you trans. That's what that means. But I didn't, again, I didn't connect those dots. So I argued with this person constantly. And then later on down the road, when I became an adult, several years, like I'm 10 years out of high school now, but I got in contact with this person again about a year ago just to catch up. And by this time they had become a mother, and they'd said that they realized that their identity that they had attached themselves to in high school, it was probably more that they were fluid, and they were just desperately trying to explore that part of their identity so they could come to that understanding. And they asked me, hey, it's been 10 years. Where do you stand on that topic now? And at this point, I was able to just link videos that I'd done on the topic and go, yeah, no, I am not the same person I was in high school. Here's the actual content I've produced on that subject itself. I don't have that same toxic mentality. Obviously, I'm not perfect. I've still got some toxic mentalities. This is why I go to therapy. But it was a thing where I didn't just have to say in like a placating way, oh no, I don't think about that way anymore. It was, I could actually go, here's the stuff I've done. Like, here's the evidence. This isn't my mindset anymore. But it's looking back at that, and I can trace all of that back to, I justified these things through the lens of a conservative Christian. I even took an election class back when I was in middle school. This is when I went to, I had transitioned to public school. And during that, I labeled myself as a Republican. And this was after studying all of their stances, granted through the lens of a middle schooler, but in an academic sense. To where by the time I got in high school, I had friends who questioned that and just said, wait a minute, why do you call yourself a Republican when your stances are all really progressive? And again, this was another time where I just didn't connect those dots together to go, wait, no, I'm engaging in cognitive dissonance. My thoughts are over here, and I'm coming to conclusions over here, but everything's actually over on this side. And all that got linked to through my own lens, is all linked back to my Christian conservative upbringing that came almost exclusively from school. This is why when I've gotten contacted by fans of Nick Fuentes, if you're familiar with him, I've gotten contact by some of his fans, like, would you do a debate with Nick? And I said, yes, but the debate I would do with Nick is asking him justification for his version of the Catholic God of Christianity. And they said, well, he normally does politics. I'm like, yes, but his politics are all predicated on his form of theism. He uses this as an apologetic all the time. So I would want to go after his foundation, not fall into the semantic arguments about his particular politics, because then I'm not getting rid of the thing that he can fall back on, which is that conservative Christianity. That's the thing I was grown up with, even though it wasn't Catholic. So that's the thing I would be going after, because that's the foundation for a lot of people. I know it was for me.
Can a true Christian separate their religion from politics if they're a politician, do you think?
I don't think anybody can separate their beliefs from politics, whatever they may be, religious or otherwise. For instance, like atheism is not a religion. It's an answer to only one question, but because through the lens of atheism, I have a particular view on the afterlife, I think that a deity is I think that a deity would be one prerequisite for one style of afterlife. As a result, I'm against the death penalty because I believe we only have this one chance, and giving people chances to improve or at least give some benefit to society is very important to me. And that's predicated on not having a religion, not having a God belief. If something like that, which doesn't come with any baggage at all, informs belief and informs politics, I would imagine that it's impossible for people to divorce their religion, their beliefs from their politics at all, which is why when it comes to politics, unless I'm talking with the individual politician, like in a debate setting, I'm going to go based on what decisions they make, because there's just as many times, well, not just as many, but there's as many as I can conceive of times where a good policy will be written because the person is justifying it on the notion of being a good Christian. They want to be a good Samaritan, so they're going to enact a very good social policy instead of a conservative policy. But there's just as many times where somebody's going to say, no, I'm going to do this the way that my mom and dad always taught me, and view it through that lens or that style of Christianity, and come up with a conservative policy. It becomes very hard to make the statement that, oh, with no religion and politics, it would be better, because there's just as many decisions that are informed elsewise. You have to try to go for those foundations and go, okay, well, why is your style of Christianity lead you to conservative policies? Why does your style of Christianity go against the things that Jesus would have taught?
So for most for most Christians, they can remember, or former Christians, they can remember when they started to have doubts of some kind. And for some, they had doubts for years, and then something, there was something that triggered them, a cascade of, okay. And for others, it just kind of lingered. So where were your doubts first? When did you first start realizing that you had doubts, and how did that affect you?
So for me, a lot of it began about the time I got, what's the best way to say this? During my last year in high school, I met a friend of mine who tried to deconvert me and wasn't able to. He did it by showing me the movie Zeitgeist. I'm not sure if you've seen it before. It's pretty infamous.
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
So Zeitgeist is a very, what's the best way to say this? It is a very awkwardly disjointed film that tries to red pill you back before red pilling was really before we had a set definition for that, where it meant like dropping somebody into freaking conservatism. Its goal is to first show that all religions are fake. And then, which the way it does it is through very misleading information. Even Richard Carrier, of all people, sees Zeitgeist and goes, yeah, no, this shit is bunk. But it starts by doing that, and then it gets into what happened during 9/11 and 9/11 trutherism, and then it starts going and showing a shit ton of clips from Alex Jones, and then it just runs the gamut. And this is a several-year-old film now. But it was shown to me by this friend in an attempt to deconvert me and red pill me. What he effectively did when he showed me that film was he got me into the Alex Jones conspiracy mindset, but he did not deconvert me, because during the entire process, I had that very like armor of God mindset. Like, this is testing my faith. That's what this is here for. But I took everything else away from it. Over time, though, it was not being engrossed in Christian culture. Working on my own in my own house without having to go to church or having to go to a school that pushed it, or being around people who talked about it all the time, because it's much easier to talk about religion in school than it is to talk about it in the workplace. Because in school, you can be like, aha, I'm going to bring my Bible to school and nobody can stop me because I've got the armor of God. And when you go to work and try to do that, everybody just looks at you and goes, nobody cares. Please stop. You're an adult. Stop trying to play superhero missionary. Over time, I slowly got to the point where I went, wait, no, the Bible's probably not really the most accurate source of information. That conversation began actually when I was a kid, and my grandpa, who was a different kind of Christian than me, I tried to tell him the King James Version was the only style of the Bible that was true. He said, let's have that conversation again in 10 years. Lo and behold, 10 years later, we had the conversation. I'm like, so I was wrong. I now know that the King James Version was written in the 1500s and coined finally in 1611, and it doesn't... That's really far divorced from anything that happened like years ago when a lot of the Bible was actually canonized. So to say that this thing 1200 years divorced from canon is actually the one and true version of the Bible, little bit arrogant. But that was kind of the first stone in getting me deconverted.
It's still 45% of Americans. It's the plurality. It's still the most. Actually, I think that number may have changed last year, but it's still among the most, if not the single most relied upon version of the Bible, which I like because it's one of the few that have unicorns in it. But at any rate, right?
But no, because that was the first stone that led me to go, okay, this version of the Bible is inerrant. Which version of the Bible is inerrant? Then it was, well, no version of the Bible is inerrant. They've all been written by men, so they're corrupted. But I still believe in Jesus, and I don't want to go to hell. So I believe in the Judeo-Christian God, but I don't believe in the Bible. And then over time, it just kind of went into, well, wait a minute. Everything I know about the Judeo-Christian God is from the Bible. So what am I actually believing in if everything written about this deity is in these scriptures that I don't believe in? What deity am I believing in at all? And then it came into, I guess I just don't believe in one. Like, there was never an epiphany or anything. It was just kind of over several years organic slide.
Well, so I've had this discussion before, you may remember, about depression for atheists. So there have been a few studies that have found that atheists do tend more towards depression. In general, that is in countries where theism is the majority. There are a number of reasons for this, but certainly one of the reasons is because you become a minority. But second of all, because if you've grown up with the expectation that you are going to heaven or hell, depending on, and you've grown up with a whole set of constructs by which you're going to live, and then you have those taken away, it can have a profound effect on the psyche. Did it have any effect on yours? Did you find this liberating, depressing? Did you what effect did it have on you?
So at the time, it didn't have any effect on me, except I still have an innate fear of hell. Like, that's never going to go away, I don't think. That's not something that I can really escape. Like,
Well, let me interrupt. So you can't even control, like, just subconsciously you start thinking, I'm going to go to hell if, or how does that work?
It comes down to, what if the concept of hell is right, and any type of eternity I'd have to deal with is one that I can't escape, and that's all predicated on previously having a hell belief. Do I think that hell exists? No, because I've studied the history and how that was actually conceptualized all the way back when we called it Sheol or the grave. And then when you look into the Apocalypse of Peter, where we started to get some of the ideas behind what a fire and brimstone hell would look like, and then moving from there into Dante's Inferno, where we start to have that kind of finalized, I recognize that there's a very fictitious movement from one version of the eternal grave to the other. So I'm not worried so much about the Christian hell as a concept, because I can trace that one back. Like, I can trace the roots of its conceptualization back. Just the idea of an eternity where I have to either suffer or I'm conscious in an endless void or anything like that. The idea of an eternity is terrifying, and equally so, the idea of finality is terrifying, because what if I die without having accomplished everything that I wanted to do? Whereas in a version of epistemology where a afterlife exists, I could at least say it's okay if I die early. Death is the first step in the next journey. I don't have that. So while I'm not terrified of death or dying, I am kind of terrified of not being able to live anymore, because regardless of all the negatives that come with life, I do enjoy living. That's at least one thing that I'm a fan of. So losing Christianity did at least lose one of the legs that kept me standing, in that sense of being able to kind of imagine myself going into another world that didn't quite suck as bad as this one. So that's gone, and that's depressing. The other thing that's depressing is being told, though it doesn't happen often unless we're looking in my comment section, being told from multiple people that not only will I burn in hell for eternity, but that I deserve it, from people who probably can't even conceptualize eternity in the first place, because they can't conceptualize anything out past a ham sandwich. But so there is a certain level of not wanting to be oppressed by people who are supposed to be loving and caring, but they view the oppression that they're throwing at you as being loving and caring. That all is depressing, and I think that I would have experienced that being a Christian anyway if I just wasn't the same brand of Christian as them. So I don't know if that's predicated on atheism so much as it's predicated on their Christianity.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking about the ham sandwich.
So you can conceptualize a ham sandwich.
I can conceptualize a ham. Actually, it's a little Pavlovian. You mentioned ham sandwich, and I'm already conceptualizing it. I can't stop myself. I'm just, So it's a problem in debates, because people who know that one just, I'm debating somebody, and then all of a sudden they just drop in a ham sandwich somewhere, and debate's over. I've just lost. So all right. So it sounds like, it sounds like it had some impact on you. I don't know. You sort of touched a bit upon, So it sounds like you're more afraid of losing life than gaining death, if that makes any sense. Is that sort of accurate?
That's kind of where I'm at. If there's one thing that I fantasize about more than anything, it's being able to do life over again with the knowledge I gained in this life. I would love a chance not to so much communicate with my younger self, because my younger self was a fucking prick. And I'm going to probably say that about myself now in 10 years. But while I don't want to communicate so much with my younger self, I would not mind dying and then coming back as my younger self with the knowledge that I had, just being able to live life over with that knowledge, like starting a new game with all the knowledge that you had for the last time, so you can play the game better the second time through. So like that's one thing that I would like personally. Would I like an eternity? I don't know, because I feel like you'd eventually run out of things to do and get bored. But would I like at least the chance to live life again with some of the knowledge that I have? That would probably be great, especially since I grew up as a competitive gamer, and that would give me a lot of meta knowledge that's really unfair to all the people around me.
All right. So, long story short, if you could cheat, you would cheat. So,
could cheat death. Maybe not get yourself clipped so bad.
And in gaming too, that's what you just cop to. So, at any rate,
knowledge isn't cheating. You're still abiding by all the rules.
Here we go. Here we go. Okay. No, let's hear the justifications, please. Please, let's hear all the justifications.
Define to me how metagaming and studying the past is cheating in any game.
if you're the only one who's got the knowledge of the past when starting the game, and the game involves exploration and learning something new as you're playing it, then it matters. But we'll listen. We'll have you back just to discuss your flagrant cheating and disregard for the rules and for ethics. And I mean, that's when we have time for like a double show to discuss those topics with you. We will do that. So, and I can tell I'm not the only one who has these objections. So let's see. There was oh yes. Okay. So somebody had tried to deconvert you when you were younger and failed miserably. You used a technique that all of us who have ever done any work as anti-theism has sort of encountered, which is, well, this is really a test from God, and use that to sort of shut that out. What do you think now of anti-theism, and how much work do you do in anti-theism? What do you think of anti-theists in general, atheists, and sort of where those movements are headed?
So for me, with anti-theism, I think that as long as somebody is willing to approach anti-theism without the religious vigor that they once so despised, then I am 110% behind. I still consider myself an anti-theist. And anytime somebody says, well, you're not anti-all religion, you're not anti-theist, my first response is, who is the most prominent anti-theist of our time? And the answer is usually going to be Christopher Hitchens. And then I will play them the exact moment where Christopher Hitchens defined anti-theism as I understand it. You can play with your toys, and I will play with mine. It's when you try to force me to play with your toys that I start to hold issue. It is just and to add on to that, it is unfortunate that the most popular faiths are predicated on forcing you to play with their toys. That is where I define my personal anti-theism. And if it is that style of anti-theism, I have no problem with it, because that is a very reactive style of anti-theism. You don't just go after somebody because they believe in God. You go after somebody because they have done something predicated on their belief in God. Like the video that I just did recently, Lori Alexander, the transformed wife, who did a justification on spanking her children and said that it's not abuse. She can have that belief, and that's fine, but she predicates it on spare the rod, spoil the child, as written in the Bible, which, when you do that, and when she makes her video, she references herself as a source, and then I link at least 8 different sources. I link 8 different sources, some of them dating back to 1971, on the studies of physically hitting your child, and go, look, this is information that was available when you raised your kids. You just didn't fucking read it because you're using one source and that's your book, or just you. Like, those are not good sources. That's all predicated on her brand of theism. I can be anti-theist against that specifically. It's like the difference between being a local atheist and a global atheist. Most philosophers will mention that local atheism is very justifiable. If every conceptualization of God that has been presented to you in a local group is one that you hold issue with or you find flaws in, then you can judge them all and say, no, none of them are convincing. I do not believe in a God, as opposed to a suspension, whereas a global atheist would include even conceptualizations of God that have not been presented nor thought of. They don't believe in those either. And that one's I feel is almost impossible to justify, because you're saying you don't believe in something that has never been presented to you in any form, coherent or otherwise. Where do you get the justification for that? That when anti-theism is used that way, all religion is bad in all forms, every style, every type of God belief, all bad. That kind of, I guess, global anti-theism I hold issue with, but more localized senses, more controlled senses, more reactive senses, I'm perfectly okay with. In fact, I have one for myself.
I will. The clip you're talking about, and we've had this discussion before too. The clip you're talking about was Hitchens versus Sharpton, and you can find that one, Christopher Hitchens versus Al Sharpton, where he talks about you're welcome to play with your toys, well, hold them dear, have your friends over and everyone play with the toys. Just you can't make me play with the toys. You can't make and it's just Christopher Hitchens is profoundly misunderstood, and he has repeatedly spoken basically, I tend to make the distinction between deism and theism in the classical sense. So, he was an anti-theist, but not an anti-deist. He was okay with deists, and he was okay with people who had God beliefs, just so long as they weren't projecting them on others. I do think it would be an interesting discussion on, because there still has to be, it's still going to be a gray area. There isn't a perfect delineation. I mean, even deists, as you had said earlier, you can't completely separate your beliefs from what you do if you're in government. So it is going to impact people, but I think there is a very easy delineation with deism, and a lot less so with theism. I'm sorry, I think I switched those two. Yeah. Okay. So we should have a Christopher Hitchens mutual appreciation show, and just invite you and I can think of a whole bunch of other people who Lilith Liberator we had on earlier, and she loves Christopher Hitchens too, and is aware. People who study Hitchens are aware that he was not against all religious beliefs. He just wasn't, and he was clear about that. He was abusive in some cases, and certainly very strong-willed. But people mistake that for a lack of clarity in the difference between his of what he was and was not against. So, how much sort of anti-theism work? We had you on for to discuss deconversions a while back. You have a channel. Could you talk a little bit about your channel and what you do usually cover there?
So on my channel, I have a few shows that I'm branching out a little bit. I have one series called Dangers of Woo, which I need to get back to doing more of, which is mainly about debunking pseudoscience. I have my main series, which is just standard video responses, because apparently if you don't do video responses, your skeptic card gets revoked. That's where I take an idea that someone has presented in video format and I deconstruct it point by point. And then if it's something that requires sourcing, so like if somebody says atheists all hate God, and then I have to go, okay, here's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article for atheism, and now here's what you're talking about, mesotheism. So sometimes I have to get into sourcing for a lot of stuff like that. And that happens with practically all the videos that I do. Sometimes I just have to get into a shite ton of sources. So I have those two ones, and then I also have another one that I don't do terribly often, and it's Let's Have a Conversation. And in that one, it's just anything that I feel like I want to monologue about. Most of the time it's philosophy. I began branching out with the Let's Have a Conversation stuff, instead of just talking about why hell is always a threat, or the difference between atheism and agnosticism, which people really hate that debate, but I'm sorry, I actually have papers on it. They usually don't. Instead of going into that, sometimes I have some videos where it's me talking about the epistemology of a fictional character, like presenting a concept like egoism to somebody, and then showing it through the lens of, this is egoism as exemplified by, say, Darth Plagueis in the Star Wars series, or here is brutal pragmatism as exemplified by Darth Bane, or here is the difference between nihilism and fatalism, and we'll use Sans from Undertale as an example of how these things get confused. Let's talk about what Nietzsche wrote. He didn't write about nihilism to say that there is no purpose in life. He wrote about nihilism to say that you can make your own purpose in life. You have to actually read Nietzsche to understand that distinction, but let's present it through the lens of a fictional character to make it easier to grasp. And that let me talk about my other passion, which is gaming. I mean, I have a gaming PC primarily for gaming. It just also helps that it edits videos quite nicely. And then here recently, I've started going into a little bit of creative writing stuff. There's a character in the most recent Sonic game that I hold a lot of issue with, Infinite, because he's written as a as a 12-year-old would understand a cool, edgy peen. And I feel like a threatening villain should not be written that way, where they are always laughing at your misfortune. They are very threatening in their demeanor, and in that they make threats, but they never manage to follow through. Every person that they say they're going to kill, they seem to spare for some reason. Just very bad writing for a character in a series that has very well written characters, strangely enough. So I went through that and compared him to previous villains and went, here's how we took previous villains in this series and showcased them so that they were actually threats. Here's when they gained their independence from the main antagonist. Here's where they started to turn over a new leaf if they did so. Here's where we were given an example of how to empathize with this character, or in some cases, here's where this villain actually murdered the people they said they would murder, so that we as an audience felt threatened by the presence of the villain, as opposed to this one you've given us who just tells us a lot of shit and never does anything. So I got to explore a lot of the stuff that I enjoy equally as much as philosophy by doing that on my channel. Those videos don't get as many views, but that's fine because my channel is also my creative outlet. And after a while, I started just inserting Sonic the Hedgehog music into my videos as a way to do that. Finally, I just said, you know what, fuck it, I'm doing a video on Sonic. I'm just going to do it now. You guys are all going to have to deal with the fact that this series actually has a narrative, and I care about continuity. So,
all right, fine. Question: Mass Effect 3. What did you think of the ending?
I think it could probably have been done better if it wasn't just differently colored explosions. That would have been nice. It would have been better if the ending also incorporated what you did in the first 2 games at all. That would have been really nice and interesting. So, for the record, I have not played any of the Mass Effect games except for the first 30 minutes of Mass Effect 1. However, I did watch Raziel play through the entirety of the series because we do have it. It's just I sat there, tried to play it, and couldn't. Same issue with the God of War franchise. Sat there, tried to play it, couldn't, and same thing with Bayonetta, actually. I tried really hard to like it, and then I just couldn't. So I have seen the entirety of it played through in my own home, but I have not sat there with a controller and done it. But the frustrations of seeing all of that happen, not just from creative media outlets bitching about it, but also seeing it in my own home of watching somebody grow to love the series and then just want to break the disc in half in the end.
I played through all of them. Spoiler for anyone who hasn't by this point. Quick spoiler warning, but I can't fathom anyone's going to be playing through it now that hasn't. Yeah, there's 3 choices at the end. 3 choices. They all result in basically the same thing. Either way you cut it, they all result in basically the same thing, and those choices aren't influenced at all by anything you did to get to that point. And for a game that was based entirely on moral choices and the consequences of it was and a genuine. They were talking about making it into a movie, and I think the first one would have been a spectacular movie. I thought it was brilliant writing they all would make spectacular movies. Brilliant writing for a series, for a game series. Between the music and these things are turning into movies, but. I digress. So, I'm sorry. I'm trying to show my game bona fides. What can I do?
If you want a game that does the moral choices thing and actually makes you feel like all of your choices have impact in the end, and it is a much shorter experience, I would very much suggest people play Undertale. It's about a 6-hour-long RPG, and it has about 50 to 100 different endings based on just freaking micro things that you do in the game. If you just so happen as to agitate a character too much in the game or kill a character that wasn't even important, just a random NPC character, that has an effect on the ending that you will ultimately get. All of it's tied together. It's one of the reasons the RPG is so short, so you can actually experience many of those things. And the game's mechanics change based on how you're going through the game. If you decide to start committing if you decide to play it like an RPG, you have a level up system. You will play like a standard RPG, and you will get one of the various neutral endings depending on which NPCs you killed and which NPCs you spared, etc. If you play through it as a pacifist, you will get one different type of ending and have access to completely different areas. But if you play through, and the mechanics allow you to do that, you can reason with people instead of killing them if you so choose. And you can do that with everybody, and there's a different way to reason with everyone in the game, like every random NPC you come across. If you play in the genocide route, you actually can get to the point where it's hard to even encounter enemies because they run away from you. You can't get items from shops because the monsters that control the shops are also the monsters that you're killing. So villages have evacuated in lieu of your bloodshed. And certain bosses will actually just not functionally exist for you. You'll kill them in a single hit because your character is too powerful, and also the game is punishing you for being a bad person by removing the enjoyment of fighting the bosses. So like the game very mechanically it's built around making the game less enjoyable when you go through genocide to make you feel like a monster. And then opening stuff up for you if you do pacifist, but it gives you other stuff depending on how you go through it. Undertale's a very, if you enjoy morality-based RPGs, Undertale's a must-play.
I'm going to have to add that to my list. I haven't had a chance to play anything in quite some time. I play Mass Effect with my kids. I play The Witcher with my kids, but it's the challenge as an adult playing those games is trying to stay away from the X-rated cutscenes when you got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old playing with you. Other than that, they're like, "Oh, Daddy, look, there's a rock monster, and why is she taking off her?" Nope. Sorry, the screen just cut out there.
Luckily, with Undertale, the game is an 8-bit style RPG. So there's not a whole lot that it can show you through that lens. But
so the kids won't be playing it with me is another way of, oh, Daddy, that's one of those older games. That's like from the prehistoric gaming era.
Except the game just came out a couple of years ago and was like just started getting stuff from its franchise featured in Super Smash Brothers very recently. It was actually the first indie game to have representation in Smash Brothers. The one of the main characters in the game, not your protagonist, but the character Sans, has a costume in Smash Brothers, and his theme song is in Smash Brothers, which was something that we didn't expect would happen because it's an indie game from an independent developer, and Smash Brothers is from Nintendo. But apparently Sakurai, the main developer behind Smash Brothers, actually like went to the guy's house. Or no, the guy who made Undertale, Toby Fox, actually got to spend a day at Sakurai's house playing Smash with him. And that was when Sakurai was like, "Yeah, we'll put Sans in Smash, kind of. Don't worry, it'll be fine." Like, just a very random rags to riches thing that happened there. My suggestion with Undertale would be to sit your kids on it and let them play it themselves. It's not super mechanically heavy because it is a turn-based RPG. But let them see the release date. Go, no, you're probably older than this game. This is a newer game. This is just a artistic style choice. Go through it, give it a shot, and then when they complete it, and if they fall in love with it, introduce them to the Undertale alternate universes, and they will never escape. I'm sorry.
Well, we play Baldur's Gate, which we network, so we do the whole family plays Baldur's Gate, and my wife has a evil orc, half orc, chaotic evil that steals all our potions. But at any rate, so we managed to do that. She role plays very nicely. Everyone knew she was going to go for chaotic evil. We didn't even have to ask. She was just like, "Ooh, I like this one. Yeah, okay, that's going to be you."
Isn't the alignment of children just chaotic evil, anyways?
Yeah, you would think so, but they've all chosen. My youngest chose that one, and that was very apropos. My eldest is lawful good, which is also very apropos. She's just not. You can't beat that out of her. She's yeah. So at any rate, let's start wrapping this up. We're going to have your channel in the description. It should be there already, but if it's not, I will make sure it gets added. Also, last time you were here, we had you on for the after show. We're not going to be doing the after show today, but we do have Mikey Fans hosting Stitch in Time, which is essentially our new after show, and that is going to be Thursday at I've forgotten the time now. 9 p.m. Eastern, I believe, if I recall, 9 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Stitch, if you'd be up for coming on and hanging with him for a little while, he is hilarious. He's a lot of fun, and he covers all our stuff. So if you'd be up for it, I will discuss the details with you after the show. But hopefully that's something that you can do. And once again, we will be covering, regrettably, more of breaking news. I've had word literally just during this discussion that they are now talking about shelter-in-place orders for the city of New York. So one more city that's going to be telling people not to go outdoors and making it actually illegal to do so. So
yay.
I think, yay, more video games, I think, is what we're going to be, everybody's going to be buying, what is it, Evil. No, no, no. What is it? Oh my God, Resident Evil. Now, all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
Resident
that
Evil
seems.
comes out. Resident Evil comes out in April, and I am psyched as hell for the remake. Though I will say this: there was a meme that I was introduced to today, or not today, but a couple of days ago, and I think it's very apt right now. It is actually a somewhat political meme. It is Bernie Sanders, and it is Bernie Sanders calls on Nintendo to release Animal Crossing early. And I recognize that it's fake, but if there's anything, if you're familiar with the Animal Crossing franchise, it's a franchise about getting yourself knee deep in debt and socializing. So it's a game series about adulting when the government says that you can't go outside and adult.
Well, you can always come on this show and hang with us. Come on, stay. This is the new socializing. This is a great boon for the show. All of a sudden, we've got guests available when they're not in the hospital. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you will be able to join us on Thursday, or join Mikey on Thursday. Like I said, I'll get you those details after the show. To our audience, thank you very much for joining us. If you want to become a patron, we're completely viewer funded, so our Patreon link is in the description. We'll be having one of our Patreon hangouts coming up shortly, and that's basically all of us are there, and you can ask us questions. You can talk to us about show ideas. We get most of our ideas from our patrons during these hangouts and what they want to see. It's a lot of fun. So instead of going out to the restaurant like Nunez suggests, you can come join us in our Patreon hangout. At any rate, sirs, thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you all tonight for our news wrap-up at 9. And until then, my name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Thank you all very much, and see you soon.